Hey guys, welcome to SAT and ACT Strategies for Success, presented by the Princeton Review. You've probably heard of us before, mostly because we put out these great books, like Best 378 Colleges every year, and we do the college rankings and things like that. But our forte is really test preparation and test strategies. So that's what I'm here to help you with today. As you can see on the slide, my name is Erica Lupi. My email is there, so if you have any questions that you think of after we finish today, you can actually just email those straight to me. If you want any more information about our test prep, you can go to our website, princetonreview.com. There's a lot of cool stuff on there. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Just a quick note at the beginning. If you have questions, you can go ahead and send them to me. That would be great, but I'm going to answer them all at the end. So, perfect. So just so you know a little bit about me while we're starting, I'm actually presenting to you today from Atlanta. It's nice and bright and sunny outside. I've been teaching for the Princeton Review for 2.5 years. I teach high school classes, big classes of up to 20, 24 students. I do small groups, I do one-on-ones, all that good stuff. And my specialties are SAT and ACT, obviously, which is why I'm here. I'm originally from Savannah, Georgia, which is beautiful. It's really pretty, and I miss it. And if you get a chance to go, you definitely should. And if you're interested in engineering, I'm currently pursuing a bachelor's of biomedical engineering at Georgia Tech right here in Atlanta. And that picture is me when I was a college freshman, which a lot of you are going to be soon. So can't wait to see that. So let's just go ahead and dive right into the tests. So first one is the one that you usually think of, one of the biggest ones, which is the SAT. So just at a glance, this test is really long. It's 3 hours and 45 minutes long. It's an endurance test. You are going to be going for a while. There are 10 sections comprising 3 subjects, which are math, critical reading, and writing. Those are the big 3. Each section is scored 200 to 800, or each subject rather. So a perfect score on the SAT is a 2400. The essay, which you do, is factored into your writing score. It makes up about 30% of that, and it gets its own separate score as well from 0 to 12. In comparison, the ACT is still really long. It's 3 hours and 35 minutes, so it's technically shorter by about 10 minutes, but you won't notice the difference. Definitely still an endurance test. There are 5 sections, one for each subject: English, math, reading, science, and writing. So as you can see, obviously there are more section types, and each is scored on a 1 to 36 per section. And you'll still get an essay score of 0 to 12. Their scoring scale for the essay is the same, but interestingly enough, instead of adding your sections all together to get your composite for ACT, they'll actually take an average. So if there's one subject that you're maybe not quite as good at, out of the 5, right? That's okay. It'll average out, and your composite score can still be really high. Whereas on the SAT, if you really struggle in one subject, your composite will obviously be lower in total since they're all added together. So that's kind of a big difference. So going back to the SAT, what's on it, right? So we talked about the 3 main types, the 3 main subjects, reading, math, and writing, with a perfect score of 800 in each. In reading, you're going to see sentence completions. So what that is you have a sentence with a blank, right, and vocab words as your answer choices, and you need to pick the one that fits best in the blank. So that's the sentence completions in reading. You also have passage-based reading comprehension, which is usually what you think of with reading, right? You read an entire paragraph, an entire passage, and answer questions about it to test that you understood what you read. So that's reading. Math is interesting. So the only things that the SAT tests in math are Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, and Arithmetic. That's it. Arithmetic being, basic math, 2 plus 2 equals 4. There's no advanced math on the SAT. There's no trigonometry. There's no calculus. You just need to know those basic math skills. And then for writing, like we said before, about 30% of that is your essay score. They'll be factored in on that, scale of 0 to 12, which you got. And then also you have multiple choice grammar questions. So you need to know the grammar rules in order to do well. And those multiple choice questions are about 70% of your score. The ACT, as you can see, is a little bit different. So starting with math, It tests the same things as SAT: arithmetic, algebra 1, algebra 2, and geometry, but it also tests trig, just a little bit. So if you haven't taken trig yet, you can still take the ACT. It's only going to be about 3 to 4 questions of trig, and you can still do really well on the test without even attempting those. So if you would like to take the ACT and you haven't taken trig yet, that's really okay. And when you think of trig, you should think sine, cosine, tangent, those kinds of things. Reading is next. So reading is all long reading passages for the most part, what you typically think of. There are no sentence completions on the ACT for reading. And then English is your multiple choice grammar, which is just like the multiple choice writing on the SAT. Those are pretty comparable. And obviously very different. On the ACT, you do have a science section. So the good news is that there's no science content. So you don't need to study your chem book. You don't need to study your biology book. Every piece of knowledge that you need to answer the questions is actually given to you in charts and experiments in the science section. So what that really is testing is your ability to read graphs well, read charts well, recognize trends and relationships between variables, things like that. And they'll all be on the page for you to look at. So you don't need any outside knowledge for science, which is great. And then the last piece is the essay, which is what they consider writing. There's nothing else besides the essay and writing. So that's it, and it's always last, which is nice for some people. So what's a good score? This is something that students ask all the time. And it's a good question. It's a great question. The average score on the SAT for juniors in general, and obviously there's a little leeway from year to year, but the average score for juniors in general on the SAT is about a 1500 or 500 per section. The average score on the ACT for juniors is about 21. And keep in mind, right, that's not the sections added together, that's the average for ACT. But, you know, average is one thing, but a good score is whatever gets you into your top choice school. So keep that in mind, right? Like I said, I'm from Atlanta, so we have a couple Georgia examples here. But different colleges have different score expectations for both admissions and financial aid. So if you're someone like me, I really wanted the financial aid when I came to college. And so test scores can factor into that depending on what kind of financial aid you're asking for. If you're trying to go to a big state school like Georgia Tech, which is listed there, which is where I go, and I love it, you are going to probably need higher test scores, right, than average. They get a lot of applicants, and so they have to move through those very, very quickly. So, for example, Georgia Tech median SAT is about a 2,000 to 2210, whereas a median ACT of 29 to 33. So you can see that, you know, it's a school that's known for engineering and science and all that. Their scores are a little bit higher. If you're looking to go to a smaller state school or maybe a liberal arts school, those schools have more time because they have fewer applications, so they have more time to really look through them and get to know you as opposed to relying on that first impression because they're going so quickly. So if you're trying to apply somewhere, say Savannah State, which is where I'm from in Savannah, you're looking at a minimum SAT of 1230 or a minimum ACT of 17 in English and math. So you can see that's a very big difference, right, between the two schools. So that's why when you're asking what is a good score, really it depends on where you're trying to go. So just keep that in mind. Identify where you want to go and then just research that. You know, you can usually find all of their stats online. If you can't necessarily find them online, contact the admissions office. They're always really, really helpful and very much willing to help because they want you to attend their school. So moving on. What do the tests actually measure? This is a good one. So they only measure how well you take the test, right? It's been discussed before that the tests are an indicator of your future college performance, and maybe they're a measure of your intelligence, things like that. That is not true. That is not true at all. There are very, very intelligent students who don't necessarily do that great on the tests. That happens all the time. Do not take your scores personally, right? Some people just naturally aren't very good at them, and that's great. That's okay. And there are people who are great at them. They're just fantastic. But they're not a measure of your intelligence, and anybody with proper practice and proper coaching can learn how to increase their scores. It's not an exact science. It's really okay if you're not great the first time. So why do students struggle on the SAT or the ACT? This is a question that I actually get from parents more often than students, right? The students know why they struggle because it's hard, right? But if you're a parent or if you haven't taken the tests yet, just be aware they're different from what you take in school. They have to be approached differently because of that. They're very, very long. Unless you're taking AP type courses, you're never going to have a long test like that. That's a really long time to stay focused, you know, over 3 hours, almost 4. That's a very long time. So that's sometimes difficult for people to sit still for that long or just focus for that long. Also, the SAT is written especially to trick students. The SAT. The answer choices are filled with common traps. The reason for this is because they can't test difficult concepts, right? So for example, in math, we talked about it before, you can only test Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, and arithmetic. Well, those aren't super difficult concepts, so how do you make some of the questions harder? You word them in a very tricky way, right? So the SAT is great at that. They love to do that, and that makes it difficult. Usually teachers in high school aren't going to try to write the questions for the students to get them wrong, right? They want their students to get them right. So that's a big difference. Also, grammar has very little emphasis in most high schools. So you do a lot of grammar while you're growing up, but by the time you get to high school, you know, you're focused more on the literature and understanding English itself as opposed to learning the rules. So grammar is difficult. Sometimes it's hard to go back in the cobwebs and pull that out, right? Also, any math that's tested on the test is content that you probably learned a long time ago if you're a senior. If you're a junior, maybe you're just finishing up some trig or you're just finishing up Algebra 2. So a lot of it is way before that, right? You learned arithmetic a long time ago. So that can be difficult, again, trying to pull that out of the cobwebs. And then also your essays in school aren't usually timed, right? If you're writing an essay, you get to do a rough draft, and your teacher checks that and makes sure that you did it, gives you some revisions, then you get to go back and write it again, etc., etc. You don't get that option here, and not only do you not get the revision option, but it's very, very short time period to do it in. It's a very short time period, and sometimes students get nervous, right? You get anxious, and you want to make sure that you get it done. It's tough. So that's occasionally why students struggle, right? So all of these are pretty pretty difficult things to deal with. So we're going to do a little experiment first. So number one, are you an average Joe, right? So we talk about the average Joe here at Princeton Review a lot. So test writers know that you're predictable, that you're a predictable student. So we're going to test that ourselves. So what I want you to do is you have 3 seconds to pick a number, any number. Don't tell me what it is. Don't put it in the question and answer box. Just pick one, right? So 3, 2, 1. All right, I hope you picked your number. Interestingly enough, you could have picked any number, but almost everyone picks a number between 1 and 10, right? So my default's usually about 7. The reason for that is because when you pick a number like that, just any random number in the world, you tend to pick a number that you use most often, right? Something that you're familiar with. And the test writers know that you're predictable like that. They know which wrong answer choices you'll pick, and they put them there on purpose, which is really unfortunate for us as test takers, but it's good to know that that happens so that we can use that to beat it, right? That's great. Couple differences between the SAT and ACT that weren't necessarily mentioned before. 1 second. Also, for those of you who just came in and maybe missed the first slide, so you're aware, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the box, and I'm going to do all the questions at the end. Awesome. Okay, so go ahead and throw those in there so you don't forget them, and we'll handle those at the end. So a couple differences between the tests. So number one, the SAT is very vocabulary intensive. Very vocabulary intensive. If you had to pick one thing to study for the SAT, I would tell you vocabulary, if you had to pick one. That's really big. ACT is not quite like that. They don't ask you about weird words that often. They just want to know that you know the content. SAT, though, loves vocabulary. That's their bread and butter. So really, really study vocabulary if you're planning on taking that test. In addition, the ACT is different because, as we mentioned before, it has a science section, right? So your science section, as we talked about, there's no science content on it. You don't need to study your bio book. Totally fine. But it is different. You do need to read more scientific graphs and understand how experiments work and things like that. The SAT essay is required. The ACT essay is listed as optional, right? It's really not. It's really not optional. They label it as optional because it's optional really for the colleges to accept it, okay? So when you register for the ACT, you are given the option to not take the essay. Do not take that option. The last thing that you want to happen is for you to go all the way through the ACT, you think that you're done, you go to apply to a college that you really want to go to, and they say, where's your essay? Right? And then you can't go back and just write the essay, you'd have to do the whole test again, which is really frustrating, and it's a waste of money, and you just want to get it all done now, you know? So, ACT essay is listed as optional. It's really not. SAT essay is usually philosophical in nature, so they'll ask questions about only appreciating things once they're gone, or is the majority always right? You know, it's definitely something that you need to think deeply about that you may not have personal experience with. Whereas the ACT essay is always teen friendly. It's usually, you know, how do you feel about school uniforms? Or what do you think about sponsorships for high school sports? So some people like one of those topics over the other. Some people prefer a philosophical essay topic. Some people prefer, you know, a real life example. The tests are different, so it's really just personal preference. And then the SAT is trickier, but it tests easier concepts. So what that means, sorry, I'm trying to catch up here. What that means is that, as we talked about before, the SAT concepts are not as difficult. There's no trigonometry, right? The reading passages aren't as complex. The vocabulary is kind of hard, but other than that, everything is pretty straightforward in terms of content. So to give you that question gradient of easy, medium, and difficult, it's not a matter of testing harder concepts, but writing the questions in a trickier way. Okay, so the SAT is much trickier than the ACT. ACT has much more straightforward questions. They're not trying to trick you. They just want to know that you know how to do the stuff they're asking you to do, right? They want to know that you know how to do the math and things like that. And that's not to say that there are not confusing questions on the test. There are on the ACT. But because it tests harder concepts, they're more willing to give you straightforward questions. And then the final difference, the SAT is technique-based, right? And that's because of those tricky questions. So what that means is that if you have a good strategy going in, you know the techniques to kind of get around those tricky questions, know how to understand what it's asking you, pace yourself, things like that, SAT is going to be okay for you, right? It's very technique-based. ACT is content. If you don't know the content and you can't do the math, you're not that great at reading comprehension, ACT might be a rough ride. That's okay. My job here at Princeton Review really is to help people get over that, right? And even for ACT, we teach a lot of technique and a lot of strategy, so it works for both, but ACT is much more content-based than SAT. All right, so how are the tests scored, right? How do you get your SAT out of 800? How do you get your ACT out of 36? All that good stuff. So for the SAT, if you get a question correct, you get 1 point. If you leave it blank, you don't lose any, you don't gain any, right? It's just like it wasn't even there. And then if you get it wrong, you lose 1/4 of a point. So you can imagine, right? You do not want to guess randomly on this test. If you have no idea what the question or what the answer is, why would you guess, right? Why are you going to risk losing points that you've already worked hard to earn? So SAT, don't guess, okay? But once you move to the ACT, things change. If you get it right, you get a point, just like SAT, right? Just like life, you get it right, you get a point. It's cool. If you leave it blank, nothing happens, just like SAT. But if you get something wrong on the ACT, no penalty, which is great, right? So what that means is that you never want to leave anything blank on this test, ever. Because you're not risking anything by attempting the question, even if you have no idea what it's asking you. You're not risking anything, so go ahead and take a guess, right? We call that letter of the day here. So before you go into the ACT that morning, right, you pick one column that's going to be your guess column. So if you have no idea what the answer is on multiple questions, you can just fill out that bubble in that one column, whatever that one you picked is that day, that letter, for every question that you wanted to leave blank. Statistically, you're going to get about a fifth of those right, which is great, right? Extra points. That's cool. So, moral of the story, SAT, do not guess. ACT, go ahead, do your thing, totally fine. That is not to say that you can never, ever, ever guess on the SAT, because you can, right? If you're down between 2, your odds are great. You got a 50-50 shot. Even if you're down to 3, 33%, that's pretty okay. If you can eliminate some answers, go ahead. That's totally fine. But if you have no idea what's going on, just leave it blank on the SAT. It's not worth the risk. So one of our big testing strategies here is pacing. Pacing is very, very important. So imagine, you're like driving a car down a freeway. You're just going, driving, doing your thing, and you hear on the radio and they say, on the highway that you're on, 10 miles down, there's a big car wreck, big accident somewhere. Are you going to go faster on the highway to get to the wreck quickly, right, and have to sit and wait and wait and wait and wait, or are you just going to go ahead and take your time, like, no rush, because once I get there, I'm going to have to stop anyway, right? Take your sweet time. Obviously, right, there's no reason to rush to that car wreck at the end, and that's the same way the test works. You don't want to rush through the easy and medium questions at the beginning to get to the car wreck of the hard questions at the end. They're hard. They're difficult. They've tested these, and the reason that they're hard is because students get them wrong. All the questions are worth the same amount, right? Every question that you get correct is worth 1 point. The hard questions are worth 1, and the easy questions are worth 1. So what you want to do is slow down. Don't speed up. Slow down. Get all that low-hanging fruit at the beginning, right? Get those easy questions. Get those medium questions. Have those points already there so that if you want to attempt the hard ones and you have time at the end after you've done all the easy and mediums that you can, you have some points to work with, right? You've got a little bit of leeway. But there's no reason to rush and try to see every question. It's not worth your time. So we're moving from pacing to plugging in. So this is our big math, one of our big math strategies. So imagine you're at the candy store. They don't really have candy stores anymore, do they? I guess it's like a gas station, so that's where I buy my candy. So imagine you're at the gas station and you want to buy, I think those are Sour Belts in the picture. I've never eaten Sour Belts in my life. I'm more of a Tootsie Roll kind of girl. But to each their own. So say you want to buy some Tootsie Rolls. You have $5, they're 5 cents a piece. If you buy 10 Tootsie Rolls, how much change do you get back if you give the cashier that $5 bill or that $10 bill? That's pretty straightforward, right? Everyone has some kind of experience with paying for something and getting change back. Not super difficult. Unfortunately, what happens on the test is that instead of saying, okay, I want to buy 5 Tootsie Rolls at 10 cents a piece, which means it's 50 cents, I give the cashier $1 and I get 50 cents back, right? We know how to do that. What they say instead is Tootsie Rolls are, 5 or 10 cents a piece. You want to buy X number of those. You have Y dollars. What is your change Z? That is not fun. That's not fun. I'm an engineer and I don't even find that fun. But you know how to do the problem, right? You've done this before. You know how to calculate how much it's going to cost and how much change you're going to get back. But they phrased it in a tricky question. So what we like to do is to plug in. So anytime you see variables in the answer choices like that, anytime it's asking you a question that's in this format, pick a number. Pick any number that you want for your variable and just plug it in for that. Solve the problem as is, right? So for example, if this 2x plus 75y equals, something, you can pick your x as 1 and your y is, whatever gets you to 10 for this example. But you just pick something for the variables, you plug it in, work the problem, and match the answer choice. It's much, much easier to work with numbers than it is to work with letters in math, right? I would agree. The reading section. So, reading section is one where students go nuts. Most of my students have hated this section because it's boring, right? You're reading passages about all these things that you don't particularly care about, and that's not fun, especially when you've been sitting in the test for so long, right? 3-something hours already, and you've got to read these passages you don't like. So a couple tips for that, just so maybe it's not quite so bad. You want to identify your reading style, number one. Identify your reading style, right? Are you somebody who's a very quick reader, but you don't understand a whole lot the first time? Or are you someone who takes a while to read, but you know everything the first time you read it? Just know yourself. Know kind of how much time it takes you, how much you understand, and you can pace from there. That's really good. Number two is you want to learn to rephrase the questions. And this goes for all of the standardized tests, all question types, math, science, etc. If you read a question and you don't really know what it's asking you, put it in your own words, right? Go piece by piece and try to rewrite the question in a way that's easy for you to understand. It's really important to understand what the question's asking you, because if you don't know what's asking you, how do you answer it, right? Just learn to rephrase the question in something that's much more simple. Number three is active reading when searching for the answers. So what we mean by active reading is that you should have your lovely pencil in your hand, right, as you read, and as you go, underline some things. Underline the important parts. Put a star next to things that you know are important. Make notes in the margins about things. That's going to be really helpful for you later when you go to answer the questions. You say, oh, I already know exactly where that is. I underlined it. It's in the second paragraph, and I already summarized that little piece, so I can just match that to my answer choice. Really have that pencil working as you go through the reading section. It can be very, very helpful. And that actually ties into tip number 4, which is mapping the passage. So what you can do is you can skim the questions beforehand, right? Kind of know what you're looking for. And then as you skim the passage before you actually answer the questions, you can underline, again, where things are. Know where you're going. Mark a little window, right? A little window of what you can read or what you should read for each question. Something about 5 to 10 lines is usually sufficient to answer a question, but just know where things are going to be, right? And then number 5 is to eliminate incorrect answers, which seems like common sense, but what we really mean is to go ahead and strike through on the page anything that you know is wrong. The reason for this is because it's much, much easier to comprehend things when you're looking at a list of only 2 available options left as opposed to all 5. And sometimes things can get confusing. It's kind of hard to remember, especially if you leave a question and then come back. So make sure that you just strike through anything that you automatically know is incorrect. All right, so we've done math, we've done reading, moving on to the essays, which everyone gets a little anxious about, but that's okay. That's fine. Essays are tough. So number 1 with the essay, length is important. Length is very important. It doesn't seem like it should be, but it is, right? You want to at least fill the page. You need to at least fill the page, all right, that first page. Fill the whole thing, preferably get at least 1 paragraph on the back, all right? Now, what that doesn't mean is for you to ramble the whole time, right? I'm a rambler. I'm sure you can tell at this point. But you don't want to ramble just to get that length. You want it all to be filled with content, okay? But at least fill up the first page. Number 2, neatness counts. That is important. They cannot grade your essay if they can't read it, right? That's difficult. They won't give you the benefit of the doubt if they have to squint and struggle to read your essay. It's not going to happen. These graders only have about 60 seconds, really, to grade each of these essays, because think of how many thousands of them there are, right? And you're supposed to get your scores back in, 3 weeks? Thousands of essays graded in 3 weeks. That's a lot. So they don't have a lot of time. If they can't read it, they're just going to give you a 0 and move on. And then not only handwriting-wise, but tying into the third piece, it needs to be neat and organized. What that means is that you need to have obvious paragraphs, right? Indent the beginnings of your paragraphs. You don't have to skip lines between them if you don't want to, or if you need the space. That's fine. But indent them at least. That's really important. They need to know that you organize your essay. Have an introduction. Have 2 body paragraphs. Have a conclusion. Right? Just have it organized in some way, shape, or form that they know you thought about how to organize the essay. All right. Number 4, answer the question. All right. Make sure that what you are writing about actually addresses the prompt. You would be surprised how many times this is difficult, or how many times you think you're addressing the prompt, but you're really not. You have to address their essay prompt, or you do not get credit. You could write the most beautiful essay you've ever seen and get a 0 because it's not on topic. Okay, so make sure you're on topic. Make sure you pick a side, right? They don't want to see you waffling between, is the majority right? Yes. Is the majority right? No. They don't want to see you waffle. Go ahead and pick a side. And usually, if you're not quite sure which side to pick the one that's easier for you to support. Pick the one that you have resources for, literary, pop culture, historical, whatever. Those are all acceptable, personal experience, all fine. Just make sure that when you pick a side, you have enough stuff to support it. Okay, and then big one, number 5, write a conclusion. I cannot stress this enough. On your essay, if you do not write a conclusion, you cannot score a 10 or above on that scale of 12. You can't. You have to have a conclusion. And very frequently, you're going to score even lower than that 10 by not having a conclusion, even if everything else is perfect, right? Because like I said, they only have a minute to read your essay. That's not a lot of time. And a conclusion is an aspect of a very well put together essay. It shows that you could compile all of the information you were thinking about, all of the support that you gave. Conclusion is very important. So if they give you a 5-minute warning on your essay and you know you're only halfway through that second body paragraph, go ahead, stop in the middle of your body paragraph, skip a handful of lines, and write a conclusion. That's honestly going to be the best thing for you. You need that conclusion. Very, very important. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start taking questions. Couple things to remember, or a handful, right, a few. Number 1, if you need to determine which test type that you're better at, right, if you're kind of in the middle, you don't really know if you want to do SAT or if you want to do ACT, you're not quite sure what's going on, we have a free practice test for that, we being Princeton Review, okay? It is free, which is fantastic, very cool. And it is called the Princeton Review Assessment, or PRA, right? P is in Princeton, or potato. I like potatoes. But it's called the PRA, and it's great. It'll give you a shorter test. It's not the full length of the SAT or ACT, which is great because that's long and unfortunate. But it's shorter. It'll give you sections from each test type. We'll score that and send you a chart which shows you which test type you're better at depending on the subject, which is awesome because then you can decide whether you want to take one, whether you want to take the other, or whether you want to take both. I took both. It was helpful for me, especially when you're starting to apply to your schools. A lot of them will take a super score. So maybe they'll take your math from the ACT and your math from the SAT, see which one is better, and give you credit for whichever one is higher. That's pretty cool to me. So sometimes that can be helpful. Number 2, if you need test prep, we have everything. If you would like to do online, we have that. If you want to do an in-person one-on-one, a small group, or a big class, we have all of those things for you. We have great resources, great books. I cannot believe the amount of improvement that I've seen from my students with this program in the 2.5 years I've been here. It's been really fantastic to see, which is really cool. So if you need test prep, go to our website, right, princetonreview.com. You can email me. I gave you guys my email, and I'm about to give it to you again. You can ask me questions right here in this box about finding it or what do you think might be better for you. Go ahead and ask. It's great. It never hurts to ask, right? Knowledge is power. And then the third piece, every student can improve. Hands down. Every student can improve, right? You wouldn't go play a football game against a big team if you had never played the game before, you didn't know the rules, and you had no idea what was about to happen to you. That's asking for a disaster, right? And some people can take the test without having any prep, and it's not a disaster. That happens. That's fine. But practice makes perfect, right? It's much better to know what you're going into, be comfortable and familiar with what you're going to see, and really be able to just knock it out of the ballpark. So that's hopefully what this session helped you do, and hopefully what you might be able to do with a little more prep and coaching as well. So awesome. I'm about to do questions. I see the little box flashing, so I'm going to do the questions. Just a heads up, if you do know right now that you want to sign up or you want more information about our test prep options, about our college rankings, about our books, anything that we can help you with, our phone number is right there on the slide, 1-800-2-REVIEW, or you can go to the website. I know I prefer the website, and you can find everything on there. And not only that, even if you're not necessarily interested in our products, which I hope you are, but even if you're not, the website has fantastic resources about the colleges that we've ranked. So there's a great college database. If you're not quite sure where you want to go yet, you can go ahead and head there and take a look. We've got things on college life. We've got things about admissions. All of that's free. That's free on our website. Please take advantage of it. It's fantastic. I know there are a couple parents in the room as well. So parents, if you're interested in going back to school or you're interested in taking any of those graduate level exams, we do that too, which is very cool. I'm about to do that as well, and I cannot wait to take advantage of our test prep for that. And then again, my name is Erica Loopy. I'm out of Atlanta. My email is right there for you. So again, if you don't think of a question right now, but you think of it later and you'd like to ask me, go ahead and email me. That's fine. I'm really excited to answer them if you have those questions, and I would be really, really, really excited to help you do whatever you want to do. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the questions. Bear with me as I go through them, okay? So, I have number 2. Let's see. So the question is, how much practice is too much for the ACT? Also, do student scores usually plateau at some point? Okay, very good questions. So number 1, I'll go ahead and do them in 2 pieces. How much practice is too much? Really, you can't have too much practice. Unless you're scoring basically perfect, practice as much as you want. You go for it. You really can't have too much. That's my own personal opinion on that. But that leads into your second question, which is, do student scores usually plateau at some point? The answer to that is yes. So even though you can never have too much practice, you should be aware that if you've taken the test, 3 to 4 to 5 times, you're not going to see a whole lot more improvement there, okay? Unless something drastic happens. Now, also keep in mind that depends on the student, and it depends on your starting point. So what that could mean is maybe you didn't take it seriously the first 2 times that you took it, right? But you decide to take it a 3rd time, and you really, really care, right? You decide you want to go to Harvard, and you got to get that score, and you work really hard to do it. You could see a big jump there, even though it's your 3rd time. That happens. But if you're working hard the whole way through, I wouldn't expect anything huge for that 3rd test or 4th, right? They will plateau, which is fine. And then if you're starting from a lower point, you obviously have a much larger range that's possible for your improvement, right? So those people are going to plateau later because there's just so much further for them to go, okay? So that would be my answer to that. Great questions. Let's see what else. Okay, number 3 I also have. The question is, I usually take a while to write essays, and they usually need some sort of revision. Yeah, we talked about that. Yes, very good question to bring up. What tips do you have for me to write a decent essay? All right, so good question. Let me pull that essay slide back up. All right, so. And I'll go back to the other slide if you need that information. I'll go back to that after this. So for the essay, like we talked about, length, neatness and organization, adhering to the prompt, and writing a conclusion. Those are the biggest things to really hit in that time period. Now, if you already know all this and you're somebody who's a frequent writer, right? You write for school a lot. You already know most of this, right? Then some additional tips that I would give you would be, as soon as you read the prompt, take 2 to 3 minutes to do a little outline, right? Write a little outline on the prompt in the book, not on your answer sheet because that's where your essay goes, but take 2 to 3 minutes to go ahead and organize. honestly, if you have that organization, you didn't waste the 2 to 3 minutes, right? Because as soon as you finish one paragraph, you already know where you're going. So organization in that sense is important, right? Being prepared for the essay also is great. So what that means is maybe before you go into the test, think of a handful of examples that you know you can use, right, for any prompt, right? Things like the American Revolution, right? You could use that for anything. You could use that for is the majority always right, right? Because a whole country or colony system, right, revolted. But some people were dissenters of that. Some people didn't want to revolt. What do you think about that, right? It could be a great application for a lot of those philosophical SAT ones. That would be great. A lot of literary examples are great for everything. You can use Harry Potter if you want to. It doesn't have to be a classic. It doesn't have to be Great Expectations or The Great Gatsby. It can be newer stuff too, really. It can be TV, right? As long as your examples support your side effectively, you can pick whatever you want. So that would be my recommendation to you for the essay. The things that are on this slide, and then time-wise, right, I think is important to mention because that's a big push. Really that outline at the beginning, the 2 to 3 minutes after you read the prompt, that would be my biggest piece for you, especially if you're someone who does write but you take a lot of revision. It can be very beneficial to just know where you're going. Now also the grammar and spelling on the test does count against you if it's blatant and if it's a lot of it, but if you've just got a few things here and there, that's really okay, right? Like we said before when we were talking about the essay, they only take about a minute to read the whole thing and score it. So they're going quick, right? Reading really quickly, so they might overlook a couple things. Yeah, but be prepared. Have a couple examples in your back pocket that you can pull out. Take a couple minutes to maybe write a little outline or just figure out where you're going to go. And then also all the things on the slide about length and neatness and stuff like that. Okay, so that was that one. Ooh, this is a good one also. They're all good. Actually, as I'm looking at them, that's fantastic. Okay, so this question says, I don't know if you've covered this already, but what is the best way to improve your SAT math score? Do you have any particular practice tips? Good. Okay, so SAT math, right? Make sure you know the content. That's really number one. Make sure you can solve for X. Make sure you know cross multiplication. Make sure you know geometry enough that you know which formula you need. Now, you don't have to actually memorize the formulas because the SAT is great in that it gives you a lovely little box on every math section with all of the formulas in it for triangles and circles and rectangles and special triangles, 30, 60, 90, all that great stuff. So you don't have to memorize those. So don't waste your time doing it, right? That's fantastic that they give it to you, but you need to know when those are required, right? You need to know, hey, this question is asking me about this. I need the formula for circumference. And then you can go back into the box that's on the page and look it up, right? But you need to know, when you need to know it. So that would be number one. I would really know the content. Number two, be aware of those strategies, right? We talked about plugging in earlier, which is over here. It's this slide. So what that means, right, is say you have a question like anything that says in terms of. So we have a question that's like, okay, Claire is C years old, right? C is in Claire, right? Claire is C years old. She's twice as old as Adam and, 5 times as old as Bob. How old will Adam be in 5 years in terms of C? That's like a whole bunch of crazy stuff that you've got to deal with. Instead of trying to deal with the variable and dealing with C, what I would say is to just pick a number for C, right? Let's just say, okay, well, let's say that Claire is 10. Boom, right? Let's say Claire is 10, right? So she's twice as old as Adam, which would make Adam 5, right? And then it says some stuff about Bob, but then the question doesn't ask us about Bob later, so we can ignore Bob. And it says, how old is Adam going to be in, whatever I said. Let's say 3 years, okay? So we already know Claire's 10. Oh man, I'm getting my people all mixed up. Claire's 10, Adam's 5. How old will Adam be in 3 years? 8, right? 5 plus 3. So then what you can do is just match that 8 to the answer choices, right? Plug in 10 for Claire in the answer choices, see which one gives you 8 and match those. It's kind of hard to visualize if I, can't write it for you, but the plugging in is fantastic. It really is. Anytime you see something that says in terms of a variable, go ahead and pick a number for that variable and work out the problem. You'll see what I mean when you get to the questions. It's very, very helpful. And if you take any of our classes or buy any of our books, they go through this strategy pretty in depth. It's fantastic. I use it now for college, which is great. When I take any kind of multiple choice test, I use it, which is cool. And then any particular practice tips other than, the strategies, right? Content and strategy. Really just do problems. Buy a book, and it doesn't have to be our book. And we have actually fantastic free practice tests online as well. If you only struggle with math, just do the math sections. That's really fine, but you can never have too much practice. We talked about that in the first question, right? The more familiar you get with the system, the more familiar you get with how tricky the questions are, the easier it's going to be to go through them. So that's probably what I would say for that. Let's see what else we've got. Okay. Question is, I'm currently a senior in high school and I'm panicking. Oh, don't panic. It'll be okay. I took one at the end of the year last year. Didn't study too much because I had so many APs. That happens. That happens a lot. Oh, you got a great score, though. You got a great score, a 2020. That's fantastic. I'm taking the November test and won't have time to take an official class. So what are your suggestions for improving as efficiently as possible? Ooh, you sound like an engineer. I love that. Okay, so to improve as efficiently as possible, if you're taking the SAT, right? So keep in mind, guys, everyone's asking you about SAT. ACT is a great option. It's a great option. And honestly, most of you that I'm seeing questions from are female. Females tend to do better at the ACT than the SAT. And I've never seen a school not accept both. Okay, so that's piece number one that I want to just kind of throw out there. But to improve as efficiently as possible, for the SAT, vocabulary. Okay, that's big. That's big. Vocab flashcards, right? And you can do that anywhere. I had a client who used to write her flashcards on Post-it notes like this. So she would write the word on the front and the definition on the back, or vice versa, and just stick them around her house or her room. Like she would stick them on the mirror in her bathroom, and in the morning she would just like do them as she was brushing her teeth or whatever. And I know that sounds crazy. But it really helped her. She loved that. And her score went up a lot in reading from that. So that would be, a reading thing would be the vocab. Also, to improve as efficiently as possible, practice questions. Practice questions all day. If you don't have time to take an official class, you can still get most of what you would get from an official class from the book that you can buy in the bookstore. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, I think our website sells them directly. I'm not quite sure on that, but I do know that our Cracking the SAT book is fantastic. I would suggest getting a book, and even if you don't have time to do chapter by chapter by chapter, because I know that you're taking it in November and school is starting, and I'm sure you're busy, and if you took APs last year, you probably have APs now. But do as many of those practice problems as you can. And I know that doesn't sound very efficient, but there aren't really tricks to practicing, right? Because you just have to get familiar. Get as familiar with the material and the questions as possible. And that Cracking the SAT book, and we have ACT as well, they really are fantastic. They go through almost everything you would get from an official in-person class. And obviously you can't ask questions to a book, but that would honestly be my biggest suggestion if you're going to take it in November. Now, with a 2020, right, you don't have a whole lot of room for improvement because you're already pretty high, which is fantastic. But don't panic. It's really okay. A 2020 is a fantastic score. It'll be all right. Take a breath. The more you panic, the harder it's going to be. Okay? Don't panic. Relax. Get a book. Study some vocab, do some crazy flashcards or Post-it notes, whatever you want to do. That would be my biggest suggestion for you. Don't panic, it'll really be okay. Also, if you want to shoot me an email later, I can give you more information. So my email's right there. I'd be happy to do that. Oh yeah, and anybody, if I don't answer your question in full, or it maybe wasn't necessarily what exactly you were asking me, shoot me an email and I can give you more details, right? I just only have 10 minutes left, so I'm trying to make sure I get everybody. But if you're really concerned or you have something that you maybe want to ask but you don't want me to read out loud, send it to me. Happy to do it. Okay. Next question. How should I approach the grammar section of the SAT? I'm having particular trouble with finding the grammar mistake in a sentence. Are there any websites focusing on this? Okay, great question. And the grammar is something that people overlook a lot. I don't know about the websites. That's actually a really good question. I might actually research that later because a lot of my students struggle with the grammar. Again, are cracking the SAT or ACT, whichever one you're going to take, you're taking SAT, goes over all the grammar rules you need to know. Really, they don't test everything, okay? You don't need to know everything. So if you're going to try to narrow it down to what you need to know, really focus on things like punctuation, right? When is a comma okay? When is a comma not okay? Subject-verb agreement. Parallelism in a sentence, right? So you can't say, or noun agreement or whichever one. You can't say, you know, I really like alligators and the crocodile, right? You can only do alligators and crocodiles or the alligator and the crocodile, right? They either need to both be plural or both be singular. Anyway, things like that, misplaced modifiers, that's really the brunt of it, those things that I just mentioned. Subject-verb agreement, misplaced modifiers, what else did I say, right? Parallelism / noun agreement, and where commas go. That's really the brunt of the grammar. So if you're trying to narrow it down, those would be great things to study. Now, in terms of finding the mistake in a sentence, that can be a little bit tougher. So what I would suggest is instead of starting with the sentence, right, so you still need to read it to know what the question is, look at your answer choices and see what's changing in them, right? Because that's how you're going to eliminate some. They can't all be the same. So look at your answer choices and see what's changing. Do you see the verb tense changing? Check to see which verb tense you need for that sentence. Do you see modifiers moving around, right? Like adjectives or modifying phrases going from the beginning of an answer choice in one to the end of it in the other? That's a big difference, right? Where should it really go? It needs to go next to whatever it's modifying. So look at your answer choices and see what's changing, and that might give you a tip-off. So that's what I would say for that. Next question, how is the essay scored? Great question. So like we said before, it's on a scale of 0 to 12, but that comes from 2 graders. So you actually have 2 graders. Each one gives it a score from a 0 to a 6, okay? So how that works is they actually will take about a minute to read the whole essay, which is not much time. And they look for certain things, right? So they know that they need to look for a conclusion. They look for what your examples were. Did they support the side that you picked, et cetera, et cetera. So they look for all of those things. And then they assign it a score, excuse me, from 0 to 6, okay? And then those two get added together to give you your score from 0 to 12. Now, if 2 of them don't agree, right, say somebody thinks it's a 3, but someone thinks it's a 6, very rare, but that can happen as well. They will throw both scores out, pick one grader super grader, right, who has like tons of experience, and they will give it a score from 0 to 6, and then they just double that one. Okay, but the essay is scored by an actual person. It's not computer done. There's no algorithm or program that does it. It is scored by an actual person that gives it from 0 to 6. 2 people do that, and then they add them together. Cool. Number 8, is it worth it to take a prep class? Okay, so obviously my answer is yes, because I work for a test prep company. But I will give you a personal example. I did not take test prep when I was in high school, which is crazy because this is my job now, right? I did not take test prep at all, and I really regret it now. I still got a great score. You know, I did very, very well. I was naturally good at testing, which is why I teach it now, because I actually find it fun. But had I taken the test prep, I think I could have gotten a perfect score, right? There's a big difference between not perfect and perfect. Even if you have a good score and you're a great student, you want that perfect score, right? Everybody wants to be perfect at some point in their lives. Now, that's my own personal experience. I also know people now in college, and I tell them I work for Princeton Review, and they say, oh, I took that prep class in high school for the SAT. And I said, oh, really? What did you think about it? Because it's always kind of good to know. And they loved it. They all loved it. We try to make them really fun, which I know sounds crazy, but we make them really fun. And so you're just kind of learning as you go, which is great. It's fantastic. And they're really worth it if you can take it in class with a lot of other people, because you maybe are shy and they will ask questions that you don't. On the other hand, it's great to do one-on-one because it's completely personalized. So whatever, you're struggling with, we can just work on that, which is great. They can be expensive, and I know that, which is probably why I didn't take any in high school. They can be expensive, but I feel like they're very, very much worth it. Very, very much worth it. You will get a lot of improvement in a short amount of time if you work hard and do the work, right? We assign homework. You need to actually do the homework. You need to attend all the classes. But if you're really, really dedicated to doing it, a test prep course can be invaluable, for sure. Yeah, that would be my answer. Sorry, it was a long answer to a pretty simple question. You're welcome. For everyone who's saying thank you, you're definitely welcome. Okay, I'm going to try and get through the rest. I have 4 minutes. Good question. With the new version of the SAT test coming out, will it affect the standing of my score? So this is a fantastic question. For those of you who aren't aware, the SAT is changing, right? ACT is staying the same. The SAT is basically becoming the ACT. They're not merging as a company, but the tests are becoming very, very similar, okay? SAT is adding a science section, I think. They're also making it so that if you miss a question, you don't get any points taken off. This is starting to sound like the ACT, right, from everything that we went through before. It's very much transitioning into that format. Now, affecting the standing of your score, the answer, I believe the answer, that's more of an admissions question that you would want to ask your specific schools. But from what I'm aware of, the answer is no. It's not going to affect the standing of your score because they're still going to be comparing it to the old test, right, that old test system. So I don't know if you guys are aware. It happened a long time ago when I was in high school, but the SAT before was only out of 2 sections, not 3. There was no writing section, okay? It was basically math and verbal as opposed to math, reading, writing, okay? There was no essay. Showing my age, I took that test before it transitioned, and then I took the transitioned one later. But when I was applying to schools, they accepted both, right? Because maybe they're not quite sure on the standing of the new test. They don't know how to compare that to their current students because they can't. Their current students never took it. So if you take the old one, which most of you will, and the new one comes out, I would not worry about it because those colleges are really familiar with the old standard. They're not familiar with the new. Okay, so whatever the standing of your score is, that will be the same. I wouldn't be concerned about it. That's really okay. But that's a fantastic question. And thank you for reminding me about the new test. I hadn't mentioned that yet. All right, 2 minutes. I struggle with the ACT science section. Yep, a lot of people do. There's a ton of information, and I struggle with getting through to the end, but I'm quite efficient with the ones that I do get to. How do you suggest I proceed in my preparation? Fantastic. ACT science is really interesting because very intelligent people tend to overthink the questions, right? You tend to try to connect it to the science information that you know. There is a ton of information. What I suggest, long story short, because we're running out of time, is when you get to the science section, flip through all of the passages, okay? There's 7, right? Flip through all the passages, see which ones are the shortest, the simplest, right? Have the simplest graphs and charts and stuff like that. Do those first. You don't feel like you have to do them in order, okay? Really do those first. That's going to help you get through the easier questions faster and then only leave the tedious ones to the end, right? Instead of, not getting to all of them. That would be my answer for you for that. Again, shoot me an email if you want more, but that's really the big piece for that is what I would say. What is the best way to study? Book. 100% best way to study is book, class, and either of those would be my biggest suggestion, a book or a class. And again, right, I would hope that you would pick Princeton Review, but I can't stress that enough. That's the best way to study. SAT, if you have to pick one thing, vocabulary. Okay, pick vocab. If you have to pick one, pick vocab. But hopefully you can do everything. Buy a book. Cracking the SAT is choice. It's fantastic. And then question, when does the new test take effect? I am not sure on that. I would check the College Board website. College Board, that is who gives the SAT. That is where I would find that, just because I don't know the answer. All right, I have 10 seconds left. I want to sign off. Thank you for having me. Shoot me an email. It's right there on the page if you have any more questions, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.